Hello, Lynette. Can you hear us?
Yes, good evening, Chair Iacoboni.
Good evening. Okay, we're going to kick off. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen here in the audience, and for those who might be following along at home or wherever you are on the web. We're going to call to order the March 6, 2023 meeting of the San Carlos Planning and Transportation Commission. We always start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and before we do, there is one new procedural item that we're going to, that I'm going to defer to staff to cover for us.
Thank you, Chair Iacoboni. Good evening, Commissioners. Lisa Porras, Planning Manager. There is a new standard item going forward starting tonight on the Commission's agenda, and this has to do with a new law, Assembly Bill 2449, that was passed in order to formalize the process by which Commissioners could attend meetings remotely. And usually the way this would kick in is that there are certain statements that we need to acknowledge whenever a Commissioner is attending remotely. However, for this evening, all Commissioners are present and in person, with the exception of Commissioner Garvey, who will not be participating and is absent this evening. So having said that, we can continue on with our agenda.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So would you please join me in Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Castaneda.
Present.
Commissioner Roof.
Present.
Commissioner Garvey is absent this evening. Vice Chair Clements.
Present.
And Chair Iacoboni.
Present. Very good. So the first, or item number 5 on our agenda this evening, is the opportunity for public comment. This is the opportunity where folks joining in who have an item not on tonight's agenda may speak. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act, Government Code Section 54954.2. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future Commission agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. I don't have any speaker cards for public comment, but let's just give the folks here an opportunity to raise a hand. No. And Lynette, are there any hands raised for anyone online for public comment?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, very good. We'll move to our next agenda item, approval of minutes from our last meeting from February 6, 2023. Fellow Commissioners, are there any edits or notes that you want to put on the record?
No.
Thank you, Commissioner Roof. No, and Vice Chair and Commissioner Castaneda, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve minutes.
I'll move that we approve the minutes from the Planning and Transportation Commission meeting of February 6th, 2023.
And I second that.
Thank you. A roll call, please.
Commissioner Castaneda.
Yes.
Commissioner Roof.
Yes.
Vice Chair Clements.
Yes.
And Chair Iacoboni.
Yes. Very good. Next item on this evening's agenda is a presentation regarding new and proposed planning and transportation laws with a presentation by Amy Brown of ARC Strategies. So welcome, Amy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. We've been representing... ARC Strategies is a firm in Sacramento, and we've been representing the city now. I was trying to figure out probably for a good 7 years or so. I'm going to have to verify that number, but I really appreciate you all having me here. I haven't been to a planning commission meeting in quite some time. My mom was on the planning commission in the city of Livermore, and I would go watch in the back when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was a weird kid, but anyway, I didn't know what you guys guys were all talking about, but it was a learning experience nonetheless. So I've been asked to come here today and talk about really what bills, high-level bills that have been passed last year that were effective as of January 1, 2023 of this year. You all probably are well aware of it. The reason and the importance of talking about those bills that were signed into law is that it really sort of creates a picture of what we're going to see this year. And before we get started, okay, am I doing this the right way? Here we go. Look at that. I'm not very good at technology, so this will be fun. So we've broken these new laws into 4 sections: housing, transportation, CEQA, emergency services, and then proposed legislation. Before I mention it, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of where we are in the legislative process right now. There were 33 new legislators that were sworn in to the legislature in December of last year. That is monumental, considering we have 120 legislators in Sacramento. What we have seen as a result of that, as well as coming out of COVID, is the number of bills that have been introduced, and the deadline was February 17th. The number of bills that have been introduced are the most bills that we've seen in the last 10 years. And so there's a lot of combing through. We're upwards of, we're almost at 3,000 bills. I'll just let that sink in. 40% of those are spot bills. And what a spot bill is a placeholder, right? It's the intent of the legislature to amend the housing and zoning laws of California. But there's no real substance to the bill. We will see an influx of amendments to those that 40% over the next couple of weeks. At the end of this presentation, I put a link up to all the bills that we are monitoring for the city, on behalf of the city. The city does take positions on bills. We lobby and testify in Sacramento accordingly when those bills are before the policy committees or the appropriations committees. But before I get to what I think we're going to see, because we're still early on in the process, so let me back up just a little. Policy committees really start gearing up in March and April. And then around May, you have to get your bill out of the House of Origin. So an assembly bill has to pass the assembly floor by about mid-May or end of May. And then it goes to the Senate. You know, it's the old I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill process, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. But if they don't pass, they die for the year, right? They can get reconsideration because we live on a 2-year cycle. So the bills that didn't pass their time frame to go to the next house, they can still, be on life support and be brought up the next year. The legislators have a 50-bill limit for the two legislative sessions. And what we're seeing is a lot of the new legislators, the 33 that were sworn in, and one of them is your Assemblymember Pappen. We're seeing that they're doing a lot of front loading on bills. So it's still early on in the process, even though we're in the beginning of March, right? Because we're still dissecting. There's a lot of, like I said, placeholder or spot bills that we still need to examine. Having said that, let me go into what great fun we had last year. And I'm just going to high level these. Lisa had mentioned that, after the presentation, if you guys have questions, happy to answer. Or I'm happy to answer them, in the middle of it. I want this to be as helpful for you as possible. So, the housing bills that were sort of high level, and again, we monitored about 400, 500 bills for you last year. These are the ones that were the most, what we felt were the most impactful, the most controversial, and the ones that really took a strong bite at state statute in terms of changes. Before I get to AB 215, you will notice a political sort of tenor on specifically the housing bills as I go through these, because as you know, the governor has, issued a new housing, new housing development proposal that most cities throughout California think is unattainable. And, he's doing that to sort of, it's a balance between affordable housing, because we have one of the highest, housing prices in the nation, with combating homelessness, right? So a lot of the times the two go hand in hand. And so he's trying to sort of blend those two. And in fact, last November, I think it was the day before the election, he threatened to withhold the housing and homelessness funding, the HAP funding. It was about $1 billion for counties, some of the largest cities, and on a per capita basis for those cities that are mid-sized to smaller. He threatened to withhold it because he's not seeing the generation of housing units being built in California. And he is also, and you guys have read the news and I'm sure can speak to this more than I can, but he's also, saying that you just look out your door. The homelessness crisis continues to increase. The problem with that is the details, right? Housing and homelessness are not a city-by-city issue. They're regional, right? And so to, sort of punish by withholding those really critical funds to not only incorporate new programs and build new affordable housing, but having the maintenance for the sustainability of it is hugely problematic. He has since pulled back from that threat, because it is a threat. He's since pulled back from that. But I only mention that because you will see a lot of these bills sort of feeling a little like, the state legislature is, ramping up enforcement, creating ministerial or by right bills that really take that jurisdiction out of your hands, right? And those decisions out of your hands. So real quick, AB 215, and again, these bills are all in law. So I should say chapter, so you're not confused, but these are all a part of our reality now. This requires cities to solicit input before submitting their first draft housing element. And that was the real crux of the governor's issues, along with some legislators. And frankly, legislators who were chairs of the Assembly and Senate Housing Committee. It provides HCD with additional enforcement authority. Many cities who tried to fight this bill thought that there was too much authority from the state and through HCD, that they didn't really know how this was going to help the effort. Instead of, it's the carrot stick, right? And we've talked about this ad nauseum. Are you going to create, carrot mechanisms, or are you going to create stick mechanisms? And that's really, if you look at this presentation, there's a combination of those two. There's nothing really in between. The other bill, AB 2295, this authorizes a housing development project to be allowable use of a real property owned by a local education agency. So basically, it allows housing on school district land. And according to the discussions and the research that was done when this bill was going through, we have thousands of acres of unused land on school district property that could be used to help with housing development. The League of California Cities ended up supporting this bill. And by the way, I'll mention this. When I say the League, the statewide association, you guys know that. But when I say the League, it's a lot of cities and counties and local governments are on the same side on these particular issues. AB 215 obviously was opposed. The next one, this was a doozy. AB 2011. This creates a ministerial or a by right streamlined approval process for 100% affordable housing projects in commercial zones and for mixed income housing projects along commercial corridors. Now, I know you all know what by right is, but I remind myself on a daily basis as a local government, person. I grew up in that environment. By right is not, you're not subject to local discretionary approval you guys know this process. In this particular bill, local governments would be allowed to apply objective standards and design review if it doesn't conflict with the requirements of AB 211. I will mention the interesting part of this particular bill was you had labor actually on both sides of the aisle on this bill. So there is, imposes specific labor standards on those projects, prevailing wages, apprenticeship programs, et cetera. So the carpenters unions loved this bill and they supported it. But the building trades didn't, because it didn't go far enough. And they had an official oppose on it and actually tried to kill it several times throughout its process because they wanted skilled and trained provisions in there to be, for those to be union jobs unless a project labor agreement is in place. At the end of the day, I've never, it's rare. I've been doing this for a very long time. In fact, I worked at the League of California Cities before we started the contract lobbying firm that I'm a partner of now. And the traditional, labor versus management fights were prevalent, but rarely do you see two labor groups knocking heads on this particular bill. This was one of the most controversial issues last year. I'm going to be interested to see if you do invite me back, to see how these bills and my opinions of them and how they're actually working at the local level, because that's what matters. AB 1029 by Assemblymember, now Congressman Mullen, it adds preservation of affordable housing units as a pro-housing local policy that HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department, can consider in developing pro-housing designation. So a number of cities supported this. Foster City was the sponsor of the bill. Basically, you get to receive credit for local preservation programs of existing affordable housing to compete for state resources. So the argument there was it is more cost effective to implement these programs with existing housing than it is to build new units, right? That was the premise behind 1029. Then, see, I'm toggling back and forth. I say this is a great one. This is not so great. I'm kind of, making it. I didn't put them all in order of all the ones that I think that practically speaking may be difficult for city governments to implement, and the carrot stick. So I'm doing carrot stick here. AB 2234 was a bill last year by Assemblymember Robert Rivas. Robert Rivas is from the San Joaquin area, and he is slated to be the new Speaker of the Assembly once Assemblymember Rendon steps down in June. This requires a local agency to post information related to post-entitlement phase permits for housing development projects and process those permits in a specified time period depending on the size of the housing development. I put this in here because that I feel that was a little disingenuous because it assumes that mid to smaller sized cities would have a little more time to implement. But when you read the language, the posting process in a certain time period, it applies to small, medium, small cities within counties of more than 250,000. So it basically affects most cities in California. I think San Mateo is at over 700,000 people here in this county. So, you've got 25 units or less, you got 45 days to go through that posting and approval process. 26 to 50 units, you've got 60 days, and then 50 to 100 units, you've got 90 days. Now, the league was, wanted a little more flexibility, so they had an oppose unless amended position, but did not get the amendments that they were seeking before that bill was signed. It basically replicates, and I did a comparison, it replicates the Permit Streamlining Act. So if that is familiar to you, then 2234 should be as well. The next two bills were a package of housing bills that the President of the Senate, Senator Tony Atkins, sort of streamlined is throughout this entire thing because we're talking about CEQA and ministerial approval process, but she gathered a number of her colleagues, or Democrat colleagues, to run a series of bills. So really SB 6 and SB 9 were companion bills. They weren't linked, but they were ran as a package. And you'll see some similarities. SB 6 enacts until 2033, the Middle Class Housing Act, which establishes housing as an allowable use on any parcel zoned for office or retail uses. This is another by right or ministerial law. The other by right or ministerial law is Atkins' bill, which requires that approval of a housing development of no more than 2 units in a single family zone or duplex, and the subdivision of a parcel zone for residential use if those 2 parcels are split or both. Again, another by right bill that removes local control in making those decisions. Okay, we're gonna shift to some transportation bills that I think you likely already know, but wanna put on your radar nonetheless. AB 43 was passed. This was an interesting one. It was supported by local agencies, in particular transportation associations, cities, the league, et cetera. It basically gives locals more flexibility in setting speed limits based on the recommendations from the Zero Traffic Fatality Task Force made in 2020. I think that task force report was the key to getting this bill passed, and here's why. This is not the first time this bill has been introduced. I think that, I don't know how many times this bill has been introduced over the years, maybe 5. That may be an exaggeration, but the California Association of Highway Patrolmen were opposed, and they're a very influential and strong lobby in Sacramento. And their opposition would, kill this, defeat this bill year after year. And finally, Assemblymember Friedman, who's also running for Congress, she's the chair of the Transportation Committee and Assembly Transportation Committee, and she has a lot of influence. And I think that the California Association of Highway Patrolmen's arguments didn't resonate with her or her colleagues. Now, I'm going to jump down all the way to the bottom bill, AB 1938, because this is a cleanup to that bill. So you never know what you're going to get until the actual language is codified in statute and it's chaptered and you have to implement it. And there was a uh-oh kind of moment here wherein Friedman had to run this as a cleanup bill to AB 43, right? It codifies the pre-existing authority on setting speed limits. But, you read the high level of this bill and you're like, well, I don't understand what the problem was with implementing AB 43. Well, I'll tell you, AB 43 inadvertently removed pre-existing authority to deviate from the 85% percentile speed, right? That codifies the traffic and you round that number up or down to the nearest 5 miles an hour. So in practical terms, AB 43 was actually taking away, right, some of those local issues and greater flexibility. So that bill was also signed. Didn't have a problem getting through the legislative process. A couple more bills in the transportation realm. Another Friedman bill. This prohibits public agencies from imposing minimum parking requirements on specified residential, commercial, and other developments located within 1/2 of a mile of public transit. This issue has been, if you look at it from a political perspective and a statewide perspective, there's so many factors that go into this sort of narrative and this sort of political issue. One is, I think you all recall, when we had the accessory dwelling unit debate over the last couple of years, one of the bills that was passed was eliminating requirements that cities would impose in terms of parking when you are building an ADU. This is sort of evolved into also really the legislature and the states really shift away from gas-powered cars, frankly, right? The less parking you have, maybe the more likely you will use public transit or use other modes of transportation. And in fact, there is an effort going on right now. There's no language, again, we're early on in the process, that allows for more flexibility for air quality measures. So some of the air districts are kind of getting together and saying, okay, we got to get these diesel trucks off the road. We have AB 617 air monitoring requirements in the state. There's about 16 communities within the state to monitor air in what they feel are basins of bad air quality and lower income communities, right? And so what they're noticing is the root of that, poor air quality or the trucks and gas-powered vehicles on our highways and streets and roads. This is sort of, within that larger framework of that discussion. I'm hoping I'll be able to, get a horse and ride it around. I don't know how long it would take for me to get here, though. But anyway, the league opposed this along with other cities. Now, the next one, SB 640, was authored by your senator. And it was supported, by the way, by both the city of San Carlos and a number of cities. It authorizes 2 or more eligible cities to sort of pool their resources together to propose a project to be jointly funded, right? So it basically pools resources with funds apportioned. So you're able to, have access to, those grants within the road maintenance and rehabilitation account. And it level, a lot of the arguments through the legislative process is it levels the playing field from a regional perspective, right? All right, next slide here. CEQA. So Senator Scott Wiener out of San Francisco, one day you support his efforts and the next day you oppose them, and the city of San Carlos has sure done its fair share of doing both. Senator Wiener's bill from last year was actually supported by a lot of local agencies. It expands CEQA exemptions for specified transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects and extends those exemptions from 2023, which were slated to expire or sunset this year, to 2030. And I've put the sort of high-level provisions in this document for you to review, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time because we do have a couple of more slides here. Oh, and by the way, Senator Wiener has introduced another bill, which is on the last slide, that cities are probably not going to like. So I'll just mention that. Emergency services. Again, this was supported by locals. It requires counties to ensure community resilience centers are able to serve as community-wide assets during disasters. So it really sort of defines this local community resilience center as really, a sign of the times, right? One day we're dealing with floods and, road closures because of our snowpack. And, in a couple months, we may be back to dealing with the drought. Who knows? I'm not an environmentalist, and my environmental friends who are experts would probably think that comment I just made is ridiculous. But nonetheless, climate change is a real thing. And I think that Assemblymember Rodriguez's attempt here, and he's the chair of the Emergency Management and Response Committee, which is a fairly new committee in the Capitol, to allow for setting a framework and allowing the state the mechanisms to support locals in that effort. Okay. Here's the fun part, and you may have questions on these bills. I will likely not have a lot of answers for you because these were just introduced. Like, for instance, AB 1657, this is an Assemblymember Wicks bill. She's the chair of Housing Committee. Don't think for long, because when Robert Rivas takes over as Speaker, I think she may be chair of another committee because she supported him during that speaker fight. But that's another discussion for another day. So she and her chief consultant have written up the sort of outline for an Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2024. They're trying to figure out how much money to put in that space, right? I think Assemblymember Wicks, if you were to ask her, she would want more than what, some of the more moderate Democrats in the legislature and certainly the Republicans are able to stomach. Because, it's debt service, and you guys know that. But, moving on to SB4, and our good friend Senator Wiener, and again, I think there is a lot that is going to be amended into this bill as we move through the legislative process, but it will require that a housing development project be a use by right upon the request of an applicant for streamlined approval on any land owned by an independent institution or higher ed or religious institution on or before January 1, 2024. So if this bill passes and gets signed, this is the whole argument that, you've got churches that have space. I mean, it kind of goes back to, the original bill I talked about that is now law with regard to the local education agency. Again, though, the by right, it really, it's a difficult one because it takes a lot of, your decision-making power out of your hands. We'll see how that turns out. Then, SB 270, which he recently introduced, it would apply a CEQA exemption if the lead agency has certified an EIR for the district, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development has approved the district within 12 years of the lead agency's review of the housing project. Just a real brief read on this, as the legislature, sort of tackles CEQA exemptions, this may be another tool in the toolbox for locals. Not sure, too soon to tell, but you have seen a number of, streamlining bills that have gone into effect and CEQA exemptions applied to certain projects. And then the last one I would want to mention, and by the way, I reserve the right to come back and say, scrap everything that is introduced legislation so far of interest. Here's what you really need to worry about, right? But for now, this is a good snapshot. So this would delete the 10-unit maximum for eligible projects and would prohibit a local agency from imposing a floor area ratio standard that is less than 2.5 on a housing development project that has that certain threshold of 11 to 20 units. And again, would prohibit a local agency from imposing the floor area in sort of, if you look at the bill, there's sort of steps on really his attempt to try and streamline and get, the affordable housing projects built in a faster time period. I think that is it for my presentation. So again, if you go to that live link, you can click on it anytime you want, day or night. You could, there's my cell phone. You could also text me too, because, you know, I live and breathe not only with my boots on the ground at the Capitol now that we're back from COVID, but through text and email. But that ledge matrix, so our team reads every single bill that's introduced. If I look tired, it's because we've read 3,000 bills, and we're planning to read a lot more over the next week or so. And we flag them for you, right? So we go, oh, this is going to be of interest to the city of San Carlos. That's a live link. So whenever we make changes to it, or we put a bill on there, or we take one off because it's been amended into something that isn't relevant to you anymore, you have access to that 24/7. We also include in that matrix when the city has taken positions on bills, and when those committees are going to have a hearing where they're going to debate the bill that the city has taken active position on. And so all the sort of the process information, as well as the text and the analysis and uploading your opposition or seeking amendments or support position letters into these committee portals are also on this link. So usually you can see what the legislature's up to by just taking a look at that. So I'll stop there. Again, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate the time and the depth, but also helping us focus on maybe what was behind things we saw come through last year that staff guided us into, and things that might be on the horizon. So good. Colleagues, any questions? Vice Chair.
Thanks, Amy, for the summary. How many bills were last year introduced?
Oh, gosh.
was over
You're going to stump the
2,000.
chump here. It was, okay, so they had a 12 to 20 bill limit. So I'm not very good at math. That's why I'm a lobbyist. So it wasn't 50, so maybe half. But I'll get you the exact number.
Curious.
But it was significantly less.
Massive.
Yeah, it is. It's massive. It was probably, if I'm going to guess, it was probably in the neighborhood of, 1,700, right? Because we were still coming out of COVID.
Right.
And during COVID, they had a max of maybe 10 at the most. So.
Just two quick questions on on housing, the Bloom bill from last year, 2295, allowable use on any real property owned by an LEA. There was no affordability component to that, right? That housing that was allowed for educational organizations to build?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think so. I have the analysis right here. And this is actually the fiscal analysis for the Appropriations Committee. Okay. And I don't see that provides the requires. Yeah.
Okay. And same question for the Wiener, the SB4 new bill, for institutions and churches. I mean, because I think one of the land use questions is we need all kinds of land in the community. We need space for institutions, and we need space for churches or whatever, religious or educational. And if we're going to give that up, we should get something back for it in the form of affordability. We shouldn't just, build luxury homes necessarily on that valuable land. So I was just wondering if you've heard anything about the Wiener bill. Because that was one of the questions, and nobody seems to know that a bunch of organizations already supported it, and there was no text out at all.
Right.
I was like,
what do we get?
How do we do that?
Right? And then where's the incentive
Right.
to build affordable housing in those spots.
And trying to plan for good communities. You should think about what you're giving up and then what you're getting.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We're going to see how that evolves. That's a really good point, and one that I've actually had many conversations with Senator Wiener. But he, if I'm not mistaken, he attempted to run this particular bill last year or the year before, and because of the he was running SB 35 and others that he said he'd come back and tackle this one.
That was my last question, if I could, which is I heard that he was going to run an SB 35 cleanup bill, and it was going to extend the sunset date, but then it was going to do some other things, and I was forgetting what.
Yeah,
those were.
and it is. Let's see. I think I put it on. I believe SB4 is going to be the vehicle. Okay. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's the case. I'm going to sit down here and, make sure that I'm accurate in that. But I'm pretty confident that SB4 is the follow-up to 35.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very good. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time and the information. And I maybe just a bit on topic. It feels to me as though the measures that took effect in January were well included in all of the work that staff did to set us up for the housing element and included in the housing element. In other words, you ran the traps knowing what was coming, and therefore we're in good stead across all of the things. Yes? Is that a good way to read it?
I would say we're in a very good place. Yeah, we haven't accomplished everything. There's some that we need to continue, that we're working on, but most of them are incorporated as policies, as action items, things that we committed to exploring and working on over the next 8 years.
And a lot of these, I mean, not a lot, but, a handful of them have delayed implementation too. So, but yeah, your staff's great. It's good that nothing I said in terms of, the bills were a surprise to any of you. We'd all be in trouble. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Very good. I think we're now into item 8 for this evening, public hearing. And we have 2 items. And the first one is...
Through the chair, we're just going to see if there's any public comments on the presentation before we move on.
Good. Thank you. Are there any hands raised, Lynette, to comment on the presentation?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Okay, now we're on item 8. Very good. I'll follow my script, I promise. So the first item this evening is consideration of a design review approval for a proposed sign program at 1501-1599 Industrial Road, APNs 046240130 and 140. And I believe we have a staff presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Capone, and hello, members of the Planning Commission. I thankfully don't have any new legislation to tell you about, just a sign program under design review tonight at 1501 Industrial Road. Let's see if I can. Great. Okay, so this site, it is 2 lots altogether comprising, let me introduce myself real quickly. I'm Ralph Robinson. I'm a contract associate planner with the town, so thank you. All right, so 51 Industrial, it's a 2 sites here, altogether comprising 6.35 acres. It is zoned heavy industrial and surrounded by other heavy industrial, industrial arts, and general commercial and industrial uses. The site contains 6 separate buildings. Each building has 2 tenants, so 12 tenants overall on the site. It is accessed by 3 separate service roads, and it is just west there of 101. Quickly note, none of the proposed signage tonight is designed to be visible from 101. So for the site overall, we have one monument sign as allowed by Chapter 1822 of the San Carlos Municipal Code. You can see that location there. It's A2. That is the same site as an existing monument sign that was previously allowed by the Planning Commission. I believe it was back in 2013. In addition, we have 8 vehicle directional and 4 pedestrian directional signs, 6 building address signs. The applicant is also proposing 2 vinyl fence screens, or banners as we're referring to them here, both on a new fence along the north side property line and a fence that's existing along the south side property line. Staff is recommending, and the current draft resolution includes removing those screens from the plans, but of course the Planning Commission can make a different determination. In addition to that, we have tenant signage, so including up to 12 fascia signs for the 12 tenants and 12 window graphics. The design of those fascia signs is kind of left up to the tenants, but a condition of the approval would be that no drop signage or other requirements of Chapter 1822 apply. Okay, so our monument sign, all of the signage is consistent as far as the materials used, the colors, the paint, etc. So we have this proposed 4x6 monument sign near that middle service road to access the property. It'll be internally illuminated, and all together we have 2 sides, 4x6, 24 square feet per side, or 48 square feet altogether. The monument sign complies with all requirements except for its location. It is within 6 feet of a driveway, but it does match the existing location of a previously approved monument sign. So for that reason, staff finds this to be appropriate placement. We have 8 vehicle directional signs, so 2x6 each. These signs, as well as the pedestrian directional signs, do exceed the allowed square footage for directional signs, but given the size of the property, the consistency of, again, the design, the materials, staff found these to be appropriately sized. And here are pedestrian directional signs, these 4x6, each of those. No illumination for either the pedestrian or the vehicle directional signs. Okay, our building signage. So we have our building address signs, of course, in addition to our tenant signage, which will again vary by our 12 tenants. So maximum size for those fascia signs, they're 3 feet tall by 36 feet wide, well within the maximum size allowed based on the building frontage. And then we also have the window graphics, so up to 8 square feet for each of those, and also well within the normal allowed standards for how much of the window face can be taken up by signage. Okay, so the 2 vinyl fence screens that are also included in the plans. Again, staff is recommending these not be included in the final sign program, but you can see the design of those on the left. We've also included this image. This is the fence along the south side of the property line. So the intention with the vinyl fence screen is essentially kind of touch up this area, improve the look of it. Now, Chapter 1822 has a general prohibition on banners, however, so between that and just staff's general feeling that if you are going to improve this, you should do something a little more permanent, whether it's, new fencing or something of that like. So again, the draft resolution does condition that this part of the sign program would not be included, but again, Planning Commission has the option of making a different determination. So the city mailed public notice as well as published a public notice within the required time frame. We've not received any public comment prior to this meeting. So based on the proposal being generally consistent with the general plan, as well as Chapter 1822, with those couple of exceptions we discussed, we are recommending that the Planning Commission grants the design review approval based on the draft resolution that is attachment 1. And so here would be the motion if you so do. Accept that? Oh, and do I pause here? I'm trying to just procedurally. Great, I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Maybe before you sit down, just to check, commissioners' questions, clarifying questions for presenter? Commissioner Roof.
Thank you. We've previously approved signs for some Alexandria projects, but now I'm having a hard time remembering if it was this one or a different one. But so is this the totality of signs that would be on the property, or is this incremental to something that's already been approved?
So as far as what's previously been approved, it's just that monument sign. So this would be totality for that site and all those buildings. And if they were to amend it at some point, then we'd come back and do an amended sign program based on that. So for now, any new signage would just be within the confines of what we're discussing here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe a question for staff, and Commissioner Roof and I were wondering, this matter comes before Planning and Transportation. Why? Is it a planned development or what?
Yeah, so Chapter 1822 specifically states that any new sign program is subject to review by the Planning and Transportation Commission. If that's something that wanted to get revisited, certainly I don't think we'd be opposed.
Well, we were just, because again, I think we were remembering an Alexandria sign program, but maybe what you're flagging is that that was another Alexandria property, not this one. Is that right?
That is correct. I believe what you're referring to is what we refer to as 825, 835 Industrial Road. So it's the newer building down the road. And this is farther south of 1501. Right. So the code does require that when you have multi-tenant situation like this, that a sign program be included. And that requires approval by the Planning and Transportation Commission. So it generally lays out, right, where the signage would be, what the size, the type, so that the signage is somewhat consistent for the development. And then each individual sign would be approved by staff to be consistent with the sign program authorized by the Planning and Transportation Commission.
Thank you. Commissioner Castaneda?
Well, I just had one question about lighting. Any change in the lighting on the property? I see that the monument sign is illuminated, but you mentioned the others were not. Is there any change?
Yeah, so as far as the signage itself, it's just that one monument sign that would have any sort of lighting. Now there is an updated landscaping being done. As far as that's not necessarily part of the sign program, so any changes to the lighting would fall under our normal standards and subject to the code requirements and staff review there. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
And Vice Chair Clements?
Thanks. I was curious about the banner definition, and I just pulled up the Muni code, and it looks like the concern there is about durability of materials and safety for the public in case something were to wear out and start whipping around, I guess. Am I interpreting that correctly? Because my definition of a banner in my head was not what Alexandria, what was presented, but maybe more like an advertisement banner is what I'm thinking of. So if you could elaborate a little bit more about definition of banner.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as this being a banner, so what you have is a printed vinyl screen that's then being mounted to the fence. So it doesn't, it's not a fence itself, right? It's kind of, typically these are kind of temporary during construction or, advertising an event or something like that. So we're talking about essentially a very long banner that's, I'm sure the mounting will be secure enough, but as far as a permanent structure, just again, explicitly in 1822, it puts banners in that. It's allowed temporarily, but as far as a permanent fixture, it's not allowed. Do you want me to speak more to that banner, not banner distinction, or?
Please, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as far as, I guess if I help describe, how would you typically describe a banner, I guess, so I can?
More of an advertisement with a lot more graphics, more words, and that it was advertising.
Okay,
more.
yeah. In this case, we're thinking of banner because of kind of the material and design of it, so less so because of the in this case, the graphics are, it's much more of, its colors, right, and patterns, and then it's maybe a little bit of, Alexandria on it. So it's falling under a sign under the very broadest sense, but as far as the banner part, that has more to do, in this case, with, again, the material, the composition, the design, and how it's being mounted to the existing fence.
May I ask staff one more question? For something like this, because chain link fences aren't attractive and the fence that's there is not attractive. And so is there some other material that is more durable that could be recommended under some perhaps different action, that it wouldn't be part of a sign program, or it might be just changing the base material with the same graphic? Is that, tell me about that.
Yeah, and I'm sure other people could speak to this more expertise. Now, from my reading of the code. I know in general we try to stay away from new chain link fences in general. So I think the recommendation there would be to consider a fence of a different material. That would be the main thing. And then as far as the existing fence, again, whether it's replacement or you think of it's kind of got that, it's the chain link, right, with kind of those vinyl panels within it. So whether it's something like that with just maybe a different color scheme or refurbishing something like that instead of, again, like a printed vinyl that you're just stretching up there. So.
If I could just add, thank you. I think if the applicant wanted to come forward with a more permanent solution, so somehow replacing the fence and still having some graphics on it, that would be something we could certainly look at from a site development standpoint and probably could approve at a staff level. I think in this case, it's the kind of more temporary nature that it's the vinyl material is the main concern here.
Yes, and that can fade over the years too.
Right.
Yes, thank you for the information.
Actually, no other questions for me. Thank you, fellow commissioners. And thank you, Ralph. And does the applicant have a presentation or comments to make?
I'm not sure if they're online. It was, okay. Oh, you're here? Great. Oh, hi. I haven't seen him in person, so there you go. All right, good to meet you. Yeah.
Good evening, and please share your name for the record.
Yes, of course. My name is Hormoz Zia Ibrahimi. I'm from LPA. We are the architects on this project, and I'm representing Alexandria. I just wanted to provide some context for the vinyl graphics portion. The two fences, the existing chain link fences run on the north side and south side, go from the street side all the way to the back. And they have the inserts, as you saw, they are dilapidated and they are in very poor condition. So our proposal as part of the landscape improvement was to replace the chain link fence completely and introduce new standard industry vinyl inserts all the way to the back. Except we chose for the front portion of about the first 200 feet at the main entry of the campus from industrial to introduce something that has some more of a graphic interest in it. A little bit more colorful in the beginning. For one thing, for the driving by on the street for the driver, it generates some interest, and also for the campus itself. And it was also an opportunity to introduce a little bit of graphics. The colors are Alexandria blue, but that's the intent. And there was also an opportunity to introduce a logo for Alexandria. These can be changed if that was, I didn't hear anything about the colors, which was the issue, but these can be all considered. Obviously, economy is playing a role here, and permanence on vinyl graphics is, how do you define permanence? This campus will be changing again, and this may be reconsidered. But for this first touch on it, this was the intent, that it was an economical way of approaching and creating some interest for the campus at the entry point.
Thank you. And questions for the applicant? Yeah, Vice Chair, please.
Thanks for the additional information. I actually really like the graphic very much, but wonder about the durability of the sign. How many years would it last with the color, with the current vibrancy, and
I can get that answer. I don't know. I mean, vinyl graphics, they have different qualities. Obviously, we would be using the highest quality possible, given our client is Alexandria, of course. So, but we can find out and provide specifications. It's not uncommon to use these types of things in landscape improvement projects. This portion was actually part of the landscape improvement, but it was recommended by staff for us to move it to signage because it was looked at as signage. But our intent was not to have this as signage. But I can find out the specifications that we're going to use and provide durability, if that would help your decision making.
Thank you.
Commissioner Castaneda, I think I see your hand up. Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Roof.
Regarding the vinyl banner, is that something that I would be concerned about it being there for a long period of time because of the durability, but I can see it as a reasonable interim thing. So is that something that could be defined as for a year or something, and then a more elegant solution could come?
I can certainly discuss this with Alexandria. This campus has gone through different iterations of upgrade, and there are more upgrades in the future, but due to the current market situation. Obviously, economy is of importance. So that could certainly be a consideration, and I can find out again, discuss it with our client and see. It's not, if this is something that is causing issues, can easily be removed from the project.
1 year might be better than 0.
I'm sorry?
1 year might be better than 0.
Exactly. So I can get you both those two answers, that what permanence mean to Alexandria, and as well as specification on the material.
No questions for me at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Public comment? Very good. We'd like to open up the floor and the lines for public comment on this particular hearing item. And I don't have any speaker requests on this item here. So Lynette, are there any hands raised for this item?
We have a technical difficulty right here. I don't see the attendee screen. It's missing. I have IT here right now.
Okay, thank you. 5-minute break? Okay. We are recessing for a 5-minute break. We'll resume at 8:07.
We are having some technical difficulties, and they're coming from Zoom, so it's on the end of the Zoom application. And so for those of you who are tuning in through Zoom, we are asking if you can log off and then log back in. So again, for anyone who is attending on Zoom, if you can log off and log back in, and we will monitor the participant list to make sure you're able to do that. And we will be back shortly. Again, the meeting is still on break, and we will not resume until we can fix this issue. But we think if you can log off and log back in, that will help. Thank you. That some of you were able to join us again, or most of you were able to join us again. So thank you for bearing with us. And with that, if it's okay with our city attorney, we can go ahead and resume the meeting.
It might just, before we start the next agenda item, let's just do a check-in to see that we have. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying for this item, I think we have, probably know, but I just want to make, just as we go forward, since the other item is a continued item, I'd like the next item is a continued item. I just want to make sure we check in before that it's working and everything.
Very good. Thank you. So I think we were at the point of opening up for public comment on item 8A. And that's when Lynette flagged we were having an issue. So I'll go back to, for all of those who are following along through Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on this item 8A regarding the sign program, please raise your hand so that Lynette can acknowledge you and we can bring you into the conversation. Lynette, are there any hands raised?
Yes, there is. We have one hand raised, Dimitri.
Very good, thank you. And welcome, Dimitri, and you have 2 minutes regarding the proposed...
Yeah, hi, I don't care about the signs. I just wanted to make sure that the folks who log back in are there. You turn off the chat so we can't let you know that we're there. I know that there's a high attendance from a lot of people on the biosafety level. So I just wanted to make sure that people are logged on who've been waiting for over an hour while we're talking about plastic signs. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. And are there any other hands raised, Lynette?
There are no more.
Very good, thank you.
Oh, there's one, just now. Oh, they disappear, I'm sorry. No more.
Okay, thank you. Very good. I'd entertain a motion then to close public comment on this item.
I move that we close public comment on item 8A.
I'll second. Roll call,
Commissioner,
please.
Commissioner Castaneda,
Yes.
Commissioner Roof,
Yes.
Vice Chair Clements.
Yes.
And Chair Iacoponi.
Yes. Very good, thank you. So this is our opportunity. Commissioners, thoughts, comments, where are you on the staff recommendation and the resolution as proposed? I'd love to have your input. Commissioner Castaneda?
Well, I think the signs are appropriate with the size and scale of the buildings, and they're consistent with the general plan policy. And I got the answer I needed on the lighting. So I see no difficulty with this. I guess the issue is whether or not we want to go ahead and remove the vinyl fencing signs. And I think the existing signs from the photos that we saw are not very nice. So I could go with leaving in the vinyl ones or taking them out, it doesn't matter, but I could leave them in. They're an improvement over what's there.
Thank you. Vice Chair Clements?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thought that the sign program was fine, and that the exceptions to the rules for location for the former monument sign and the new monument sign, I thought the staff recommendation was good with all of that. Regarding the vinyl sign, as I said, I find it very attractive, and I do think it would enhance that site. However, I understand that our code does not promote the use of vinyl even as a temporary measure. So I guess I would support the staff recommendation to omit the vinyl sign from the report. But I would also be open to, per Commissioner Castaneda's point, perhaps an approval for only like a one-year usage or something. But that's where I am. I found it very attractive. It's certainly better than what's there now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Roof?
Yes, I also found the sign, the number and size of the sign seemed to be consistent with the project. So I'm good with that. As for the vinyl sign, I would tolerate it, but for a defined period of time so that it doesn't stay up there for years, is where I'm landing on it. But I guess it would be up to the applicant to decide if it's worth making one for a year or not, but that's my suggestion. Not having it at all would be okay too.
Right, thank you. And I think from my point of view, I would support staff's recommendation, the resolution as written. The principle I would use on the vinyl sign is I'd rather not have any more plastic in the world. And so, unfurling a whole bunch of plastic and sticking on a fence and then tearing it down even after a year and throwing it away kind of just, it doesn't push my buttons. And that said, I think the graphics are fine, and if they were on a nice thin piece of aluminum or what have you, if the point is to make the fence attractive, then and there's a way to do it, then maybe there's another material. So I'd like to separate the graphic and the imagery from the material, and therefore, in this case, I would support staff's recommendation and not have the vinyl sign for my vote. So with that, I think, would anyone like to make a motion or say what motion they would like to make if it's different than what's proposed?
Can I just ask before a motion, so this motion means no vinyl sign? Is that the? Okay.
And maybe the follow-up, thank you for that, is in the event that we say no vinyl sign, is the applicant able to come on back and apply for an amended sign program with a different, like the same graphic but on a different material? I mean, how would you work that?
No. Okay. I think the issue really is the material, right? Because our code clearly defines vinyl and banners, and this looks like a duck, so it is a duck. If the applicant were to come back with some other material, a permanent material that just had, you know, the decor on it and no signage, it's not a sign anymore. And so we could approve that at a staff level. If they wanted to come back with something that was permanent, had the decorative imaging, you know, the graphic, and had a small sign that identified the campus, that sounds like an amendment to the sign program. We come back to you. Yes.
Very good. So therefore, Commissioner Roof, with that, that is an...
I would move that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution approving the sign program for the site and 6 industrial buildings at 1501, 1531, 1541, 1551, 1561, and 1581 Industrial Road, APN 046-240-130 and 046-240-140.
Thank you.
I would second that motion.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Castaneda?
Yes.
Commissioner Roof?
Yes.
Vice Chair Clements?
Yes.
And Chair Iacoponi?
Yes. Thank you. Our next agenda item, item B, consideration of a resolution recommending the City Council adopt an ordinance amending San Carlos Municipal Code Title 18 to regulate laboratories with biosafety levels. This is a continued item from our last meeting, and I think we'll turn it over to staff for a follow-up presentation.
Thank you. Good evening. Lisa Costa-Sanders, Principal Planner with City of San Carlos. As indicated, this is a continuation from the February 6th Planning and Transportation Commission meeting, where at that meeting, the Commission conducted the public hearing and requested staff return with additional information on biosafety standards and levels. And also bring forward an ordinance for consideration that allows BSL 3 activities with a conditional use permit and prohibits BSL 4 activities. So before you tonight, staff has provided the original ordinance that was considered in February, as well as an optional ordinance as requested by the Commission. So attachment 3 to the staff report provides additional information on questions that were raised by the Commission and public relating to BSL 3 activities concerning security, safety, seismic, and flooding precautions. And then as noted, we have 2 ordinances prepared for your consideration this evening. Both ordinances permit BSL 1 and 2 activities with no additional city review, and both ordinances prohibit BSL 4 activities. Option 1 ordinance also prohibits BSL 3 activities, while Option 2 ordinance allows BSL 3 activities with a conditional use permit. We've also, in both ordinance, also have a zoning definition for biosafety levels. And then we've modified the different commercial and industrial zoning districts to be very clear on the different activities. All right, so this is the Option 1 ordinance, essentially the original ordinance that was presented at the February 6th meeting, prohibits BSL 3 and BSL 4 activities. We've made some very minor changes to that ordinance to incorporate the use regulations in the commercial industrial land use regulation tables. And then the new ordinance, Option 2, is a new option which allows BSL 3 activities with a conditional use permit and prohibits BSL 4 activities. The ordinance also includes new standards and findings for these activities and requires BSL 3 activities to be accessory to the primary research and development use on the site. So the Planning Commission is quite familiar with what a conditional use permit is. It's a discretionary permit that are considered on a case-by-case basis with consideration of site-specific conditions. the commission has the authority to approve, conditionally approve, or deny use permit requests, and the commission is required to make findings in order to do so. The use permit process also provides for public input prior to commission consideration, and finally, use permits that are revocable if the applicant fails to comply with the required conditions. So under option 2 ordinance, an application would be required to submit a biosafety plan that includes the materials that would be present on the site, a list of the engineering controls, safe handling procedures, and emergency procedures. This plan is required to be submitted prior to consideration of the use permit by the Planning Commission and will be specific to the requested site lab activities. In addition, the applicant will be required to submit a medical waste management plan prior to consideration by the commission. And this is all the items that would be required to be included in that plan. So for the commission to consider a conditional use permit for BSL 3 lab, the commission will be required to make the standard findings that you already have in your code, and we have added 2 additional findings. One, that the applicant has made the adequate provisions to address emergency procedures, and 2, that the applicant has provided a peer review of the proposed facility, safety equipment and practices, demonstrating compliance with the guidelines in the biosafety, microbiological, and biomedical laboratories, or known as the BMBL. And if granted, the applicant will be required to comply with operational and performance standards to ensure the BSL 3 activities occur in a safe manner. And specifically, we've outlined at least 10 feet above base flood elevation, and the use is limited to on-site tenants. In addition, the applicant will be required to submit an annual report demonstrating compliance with the BMBL guidelines. Failure to submit the report, or if the city finds the applicant to be in violation, may result in revocation of the use permit. So there would be a hearing before the commission where you would be able to evaluate that. The city will follow these steps to monitor to compliance. One, as I indicated, the applicant's required to submit the annual report. The city will have the annual report peer reviewed, and if the report is found to be in compliance and no action is needed, the applicant will submit another report in a year. If the annual report is not found to be in compliance, the use permit could be revoked. Staff will be tracking this annual report requirement in the city's permitting system, and the applicant would also be required to submit a report when the BSL activity has ended or the laboratory is decommissioned. So staff recommends the commission adopt a resolution recommending the city council adopt an ordinance to prohibit BSL 3 and 4 activities. Alternatively, the commission may adopt a resolution recommending the city council adopt an ordinance to require the use permit process for BSL 3 activities and prohibit BSL 4 activities. So this is the motion, should you choose to do so. And then if the Planning Commission were to make a recommendation this evening, we have that item tentatively scheduled for the March 27th City Council meeting. And we have staff available to answer your questions. Thank you. That concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. I think we'll start with commissioners' follow-up questions for Lisa. Vice Chair Clements.
Thank you, Chair. Lisa, could you go back to the slide that said if the conditional use permit requirements are not met, what would happen?
So failure to submit the reports, or if the reports are not in compliance, then we would follow the revocation process that's outlined in San Carlos Municipal Code. It's 18.27, and I believe that requires a hearing before the Planning and Transportation Commission.
Okay. Can you go, I think it wasn't this slide, I think it was perhaps the next slide. I think, yes, that. 3, if it's in compliance, there's no action. 4, not in compliance immediately, they could risk revocation.
Correct.
What would be the precipitating event for that hearing to revoke?
If staff found after review of the annual report it's not in compliance, then I believe, Greg, do you have that 18.27 handy? I think it's a notice and a formal hearing.
Yeah, it's a noticed hearing requirement, due process hearing. I might add that this wouldn't be the only I mean, the reporting to the city, if we found something that was a problem, we would certainly report it to state or federal agencies that have jurisdiction over the lab.
Right, and you had also said that if they came forward with a different request, and perhaps it wasn't on the annual schedule, that the adherence would also be looked at that time. Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Roof?
The rules for city oversight, I'm wondering how they mesh with the county, state, and federal rules. So would our rules just supplement the existing rules, or would they preempt? Would they take total control under this city?
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't
How does that
preempt.
work?
Right. So what we're really looking for is the plan to show that they are in compliance with all of those other rules and regulations. And that's why we would have that peer reviewed to make sure that the right expert is looking at it and they are able to determine that, yes, they are in compliance with all the rules that apply. Because each lab and each activity are going to have different permitting requirements, right, depending on the agent and what they're doing there. And so we're just making sure that it's in compliance with all of the rules that are currently out there.
Thank you, that helps.
Good. Two from me, and then I'd like to circle back. I think the first one is if a tenant of one of these properties got a conditional, or well, maybe I just need help to understand who the conditional use permit applies to. Is it a pathogen for a period of time? Is it a pathogen at a lab? Is it the lab space, and therefore that right could be subleased to somebody else, and we wouldn't necessarily know that the baton got passed a couple of times? So just like, how do we know all of those things?
And that's why we added that requirement that it be for the tenant on the site, because we want to make sure it's not, a developer saying, okay, I've got a BSL-3 lab, everybody come and feel free to use it. It needs to be specific for the tenant on the site. And so the conditional use permit would have to be worded as such that it applies for this tenant and for this specific plan. If they choose to shift things and instead of analyzing XYZ, they're analyzing 1, 2, 3, they need to come in and amend that plan. And they need to give you a new, all the new reporting. I'll make sure I get it right. New biosafety plan to outline exactly what they're going to be doing on site, and a new medical waste plan. And then you would need to evaluate that to determine if you want to amend it or not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess I say I was hoping that would be the answer, but I'm mindful of the comments that have been flagged about transparency, and so I'm just testing for how we're thinking about transparency. The second one that I had was really simple. Does the peer-reviewed plan also require an on-site inspection?
So what we're looking at before the commission considers it is the plans, and to make sure the plans, follow all the regulations. The annual reporting, I don't think we've decided if it requires an annual inspection or not. Yeah, we have not specified that. That could be a condition that the commission asks, or you could amend the ordinance to include that as a requirement.
So to get maybe just yes to the second part, but that's my view. My question was, will our peer review consultant or will someone from the city giving us advice before any conditional use permit is reviewed be able to say, I have done A, B, C, D on site and verified that it meets or exceeds the regulations, as opposed to having read their report or only read their report?
Megan, did you hear the question, Megan?
I'm sorry. No.
Can you just
Yeah,
repeat
happy
that?
to.
Sorry.
No problem. Before the Planning and Transportation Commission were presented with a case for a CUP for BSL-3, would there be a requirement that an expert review on site what the report said and verify that what was in place was what was supposed to be in place for safety, and that the equipment was nominally working the way it was advertised?
Well, I think the issue might be they're not going to order the equipment and, load up the lab until they have your approval. So I think what we could add in there is, we have somebody reviewing it to make sure that this plan, fits the requirements that are necessary, and then a post-inspection to make sure that they've implemented everything they said they were going to implement, and failure to do so within a certain amount of time could then trigger revocation, because they're not going to fit the lab until they know they can have the lab.
You're absolutely right. So maybe, again, the trigger, well, we can do this during the deliberation. You've answered the question.
Okay.
Thanks. Let me go back through. Commissioner Castaneda?
I'd like to go back to the person who would be doing this review, the peer review. Many places that are having these types of labs have biosafety committees. And of course, we do not have a biosafety committee, and this is an alternative, as I understand it, to having a committee. Are there committees in the county? Were there any considerations of being able to use another biosafety committee from, that would perhaps have some credibility rather than an individual consultant like this for peer review?
I know there's none in the county, but did we find any in the state of California? I believe the only ones that were located were in the East Coast.
That sounds great.
Yeah. I just wanted to confirm that our research, the only committees that were found were in the East Coast. We did speak with representatives from there, but there's none in San Mateo County, for sure.
So this is actually the only alternative
that we have at the moment.
I'd also like to know the emergency procedures that would occur, if we could walk me through that, assuming some type of an accident in the laboratory. It's my understanding that the laboratory itself is responsible for containing biological hazards. But what happens in the event of a fire? I mean, these buildings, there's limited access. What about a fire? What about a flood? How does the city and the county, in the case of having biological organisms, how does this overlay? Like who gets in the building?
Sure. So we did talk to the fire marshal, and what they need to know is what's in the building, right? And then they can evaluate how they're going to approach it. It's true with any business that has any kind of hazardous materials. It's not unique to this type of a situation. So they're going to determine what's in it before they enter it. And they do have, the fire marshal indicated, these BSL-3 labs and many of the labs have enhanced fire suppression systems. So it typically will take care of any situation before they need to enter it. And then they can augment the fire suppression system by using their fire engines to pump into it. So they can connect directly into it and really add more water as well. He also indicated that there's limitations on the quantity of hazardous materials the higher up you go in a building. So there's limitations on that, and that would need to comply with the California Fire Code. There's fire separation requirements the higher up you go in buildings. Combustion contains, you need to suppress the fire before they produce large amount of heat. And I think those were the main points that he made. Yeah. I also know that from the recent flood, we checked in with the newer buildings, and they're all being constructed above the flood elevation. And they have redundant systems in place, and they have generators. And so the newer buildings did not have system failures during the recent flooding events.
Okay, and then just one more question. Many of the regulations apply to the actual physical structure of the lab and how it's constructed and how it's run and the procedures, but not very much that we have in here applies to the actual nature of the research itself. So I was wondering about the choice of language that you made to be accessory to the primary use. whether that is actually sufficient.
Yeah, so our concern with adding that language is we didn't want there to be a standalone BSL-3 lab that other businesses could come utilize, that it was specific for the tenant on that site, and they were responsible for it, and they had the control over it. And so we didn't set up kind of a BSL-3 lab that others could, plug and play, which obviously I don't think they do that in the industry, but we just wanted to make sure that that was spelled out in the code.
You did it that way, but there's actually you haven't set out any limitations on the type of research that could be conducted.
That would need to be evaluated through the use permit process.
So, okay, I was thinking of, gain of function and the EPPI type of research, whether I would like to see those prohibited.
Yeah, I think the only concern about being very specific on it is this is going to evolve. We usually have codes in place for years, right? And so if we're very specific, it may not capture whatever the next thing that's being studied. But we can certainly add, I don't know if there's any thoughts.
Well, the thought I had was, just keep in mind that a conditional use permit, if you want to go in that direction, is a discretionary land use approval. So we have discretion whether to allow it or not, and condition it if we think we can't make the findings. So if there's something particular to a type of business or type of research, that's when we could address it. We have the ability to address it then and say, no, you can't do that. If you want a permit, we can't make the findings.
And so we have the ability, but I would question whether at this stage we have the expertise.
Well, I think that's where the peer review comes in, and we're not. City of St. Carlos size does not have that kind of expertise, so that we're having the developers fund that peer review exercise to make sure that they're in compliance with the regulations. And I think we do have other resources too. I mean, we have the county environmental health department and others that create the regulations and also are further oversight over these types of facilities. So, I mean, that's, I think, what's comes out through what we're doing with the peer review and the use permit. So we're going to be looking at those resources whenever we see something like this come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Roof?
Thank you. Sort of a follow-up on this. It's a nicely detailed set of things that need to be in the conditional use application here. But would that be constraining in any way for, can we impose further requirements or objections? I just want to be able to wholly decide yes or no without constraint when we're presented with a specific situation.
Well, I'll answer this one as well, Lisa, if there's anything you can add. I think that this discretionary process creates some flexibility for us because we don't have really a set standard in the sense that, hey, you have to do this. If we're going to grant a use permit, these are standards that have to be met. But the findings these specific findings are designed to create assurance that you can make the findings. So like address emergency procedures. Well, the types of substances that they're using might implicate, well, what emergency procedures are you proposing? So we would hypothetically, that's one avenue that we would use the findings to create conditions that would be appropriate for a particular development. And then again, if it's something that we feel, and you or a future commission feels, hey, I'm not satisfied, you don't have to make the findings. They're not mandatory. They don't have a right to an approval. That's why we have this use permit process.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Clements, follow-up?
Really just one. So to me, the value really hinges on the quality of the peer review because we don't have the expertise. And I'm assuming that staff would seek expertise to craft the RFP as to what we'd be looking for in an on-call consultant. And then that consultant could not apply because they helped craft the RFP. But I'm not sure how many people are expert consultants in this area. So I just wanted to confirm that would be the process, and that we felt good that we had an adequate pool to draw from, even if our own consultant could not apply.
Yes, we've done some preliminary research on different firms that would provide that service, and we feel that there's a few out there that could assist us. Yes.
Thank you. I had just one other question, which I know we had talked about real estate viability and marketability from the last meeting, and didn't know if we had any more information about, even though 1% of labs create the space, how important the ability to create the space was in the market. Or I don't think that I saw cost information, but just wondering, I'm assuming that the cost of an on-call consultant would not be prohibitive, but any more information about the costs that the applicant would bear and whether that would be tenable in the, in the real estate market?
To apply for the use permit?
To apply for the use permit.
Yeah, it's our standard use permit fee.
But the additional fees would
and then
apply for
whatever
the
it would be for the
consultant.
peer review. Right.
Yes, right. So you'd have a standard CUP fee for this, but the only additional cost would be the on-call consultant.
Correct.
Which to me doesn't sound very expensive because of the phrase on-call. So, okay, thanks. So back to the basic question, which was any indication of the market's willingness to pick up a fee of whatever size you estimate, and whether that would be helpful.
We did not do that research.
Thanks.
No further questions for me at this time. Thank you. I think we need to move on to public comment. So maybe a couple things. I have in front of me 3 speakers here in-house, but I'm mindful from Lynette's comment earlier that there are a larger number online, and so I'll propose that we'll start, Lynette, with maybe the first 5 hands that come in. And I'm also mindful that there was some comment last time about the length of time everyone had, and this evening, I'll ask everyone 2 minutes, please, and no more, and I'll also respect that. So thank you. Lynette, our first caller.
Yes, first caller is Christy.
Thank you for joining this evening, Christy, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello. Hi. Good evening. I am Christy Sharilla, Biocom California's Bay Area Policy Manager. Biocom California is the state's oldest and largest association for the life sciences, advocating on behalf of 1,700 members. We submitted a comment letter on this item last month. The local life science community is a significant contributor to the regional economy and to life-saving treatments and cures for all human ailments, improving health outcomes and quality of life. At the last Planning Commission meeting on February 6th, speakers voiced concern about labs being unregulated or underregulated. I could spend much more time than my allotted 2 minutes listing all the regulatory agencies that interact with labs and the permits they are required to obtain, but here is an abbreviated list. International Organization for Standardization and ISO certification, Drug Enforcement Administration license, U.S. Department of Agriculture registration, National Institutes of Health registration, Centers for Disease Control Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, CLIA certification, which is regulated by the FDA, Biosafety Level certification, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services certification, California Department of Public Health licensing and registration, Cal EPA Certified Unified Program Agency permit, Cal OSHA Laboratory Standards compliance, Hazardous Materials Business Plan compliance, Medical Waste Management Plan compliance, Radiological Health permit, Water, Wastewater, and Stormwater permits, Fire Department permit, Air Pollution Control permit. The regulations enforced by these agencies are on the whole very conservative. For example, a lab cannot pour 12% ethanol down a drain. It must be disposed of as hazardous waste, meaning that it never enters the public waste stream. If you poured a bottle of wine down the drain at your home, under these same regulations, you would be in violation of your hazardous materials permit. Comparing criminal clandestine activities such as lab operating in a residential garage to regulated lab operations creating treatments and cures for diseases is a false equivalency. As you have heard, the industry is very highly regulated and has a high rate of compliance because of the staff our companies employ to ensure conformity. In addition to maintaining this multitude
Christy?
of permit, yeah.
I'm sorry, your 2 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your views. Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is Geeta.
Good evening, Geeta. Welcome. Thank you for joining. You have 2 minutes, please.
Good evening. My name is Geeta Dev. I'm with the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. Last week we had a webinar on this very subject, and a couple of things I'd like to make clear. One is that it is very good that you are in fact looking at this kind of ordinance, and I'd say it's a fairly good start. It looks like it was designed mainly from the industry inside and has yet to take into consideration some of the issues that were raised in the webinar within the industry as well as for the community. So I would say it's a good start, but it's not there yet. So I would say that you probably need to take more time to figure out a better ordinance and a little bit more thorough ordinance. On the other hand, I would also point out that if there's private money involved, and if the labs are operating only on private money, they're not required to meet with all these regulations. Some of them, yes, but not all of the ones that were rattled off by the Biocom representative. One would hope that they would all be required, but they are not, in fact, all required. And that is a concern at the very highest levels of government right now, that there are BSL-3 labs that are not regulated because they're privately funded. It's also within the scientific community a growing concern. I also point out that there are animal labs involved which are not yet covered by this ordinance, and that's an important consideration too. So I would simply say you should consider the risk, how little we know at this point, how crowded this area is, and decide whether the risks are something that you're worth taking on at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. Appreciate your comments. Lynette, our next caller.
Next caller is Paul Magginetti.
Thank you. Good evening, Paul. Welcome. Thank you for your comments and your submission earlier. And you have 2 minutes, please.
Good evening. Thank you. Yeah, in the video that I sent for inclusion in the public record, you will find why option 2 falls short of what is needed to protect the public. If you follow the link in the letter I sent, you will find dozens of serious lab accidents from the recent past. According to the CDC's own annual records, they receive about 200 reports of theft, loss, release of biological agents from the select agents toxins category per year. These agents have the potential for use as a bioweapon. This equates to an average of 4 incidents at labs per week. This doesn't even account for all these other labs that we're talking about. Private BSL-3 labs are not required to report incidents to anybody. These incidents are caused mainly by human error. The best designed lab in the world can't prevent these incidents. We need to be prepared for when they do happen. There is no comprehensive oversight and response mechanism in the Bay Area. We aren't ready yet. What it all comes down to is that there is no plan in place for when the unthinkable happens. Option 2 allows BSL-3 labs to be built without limiting the number of labs. It removes the incentive to create a real mechanism that truly protects public health. It trades public safety for short-term economic gain. There are plenty of BSL-1 and BSL-2 applications that afford economic benefits without putting public health and safety at risk. Until all issues are addressed in a transparent way, BSL-3 labs should not be allowed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul, for your comments. Lynette, let's take two more. So the next caller, please.
Next caller is Stephen Goodell.
Good evening, Stephen. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hello, San Carlos Planning Department. My name is Steve, and I am a downwind neighbor in Redwood Shores. I'm calling to voice my opposition to Biohazard 3 labs in San Carlos, or actually really anywhere in urban SF Bay areas. If the FBI can be trusted, the current pandemic is likely a result of a lab leak working on coronavirus, which made its way around the world and still plagues us today. The Wuhan Microbiology Laboratory worked on coronaviruses in BSL-2 and BSL-3 labs. To quote FBI Director Christopher Wray, Monday, March 1st, quote, "The FBI has for some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident." Now, even if you disagree, that you aren't sure that it came from a BSL-3 lab, do you think it's possible? Do you think there's a 50-50 chance? Do you think there's a 25% chance? 10% chance? Even a 1% chance? There are well over 70,000 cases in Wuhan with over 4,000 deaths. Are you willing to take even a 1% chance that San Carlos becomes ground zero for the next world-infecting plague that decimates a town in illnesses, deaths, and reputation? In the last meeting, it was stated that only 1% of labs would even be a BSL-3. You already have a ton of life science companies. Just look around. Drive on the freeway, you'll see them there everywhere. Why take even a 1% risk of a plague that would decimate San Carlos and permanently destroy your reputation for only 1% of the overall lab revenue? Do you want to be infamous around the entire world? And are you willing to roll that dice? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate your comments this evening. And Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller, Debbie and Gary.
Good evening. Who do we have on the phone, Debbie or Gary?
Gary.
Gary, good evening. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you for considering community's input on the proposed biosafety level ordinances. I strongly support the ordinance that will ban high-level containment biosafety level 3 and 4s in San Carlos. I don't think allowing these labs with proposed conditional use permit adequately protects the public and environment safety. That ordinance seems woefully inadequate because it basically allows the labs to police themselves. It does not include any setback requirements for homes, schools, or the Bay, and doesn't require them to report lab incidents to the public. It doesn't place any limitations on high-risk research, such as gain of function on lethal pathogens like SARS. There is no public accountability. There's an unprecedented proliferation of private biosafety labs throughout Silicon Valley. There is such an insignificant oversight, regulation, and transparency. It is concerning how little public information is available. We perceive this to be a coordinated effort by the private billion-dollar bioscience industry and developers to shut down opposition and stifle local regulations by claiming they are highly regulated, or that the community concerns are based on fear, not facts. They should not be allowed to justify their secrecy and lack of transparency by claiming proprietary or security issues. The public has a right to know what pathogens are being researched in labs next door to us. We need local, enforceable regulation that will minimize the risk of deadly infectious diseases being spread in the community and the environment. Please ban biosafety level 3 and 4 labs in San Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
And I'm next, please. Debbie?
Sure, Debbie, go right ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for hearing our public comments. I hope you will join many cities on the East Coast and ban the high containment biosafety level 3 and 4 labs in our community. Citing these private labs in heavily populated areas is an issue of nationwide concern because of the risk of spreading potential lethal infectious diseases. Dr. Richard Ebright, the co-founder of biosafetynow.org, recently summed up the public safety risk. He said, "The government does not even maintain a comprehensive database of where such experiments are taking place, let alone practice any rigorous oversight of them. Instead, there are different standards based on crude risk categorization, funding source, and research facility. It's a crazy patchwork quilt of rules giving rise to a big zone of uncertainty about which labs are doing what, under whose oversight, and with what level of security and precaution. Biosafety Now agrees that the public should have a strong voice in deciding what research is performed and where it is performed. Dr. Kenneth Bernard, a board member of the National Institute of Health's National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity, recently said, "We have to deal with the problem of domestic research that is not funded by the U.S. government. That's a big chunk right now, especially out here in the West with Silicon Valley." Stanford researcher Dr. David Relman also recommends stronger oversight. In conclusion, the real question is whether the serious risk of allowing private high-containment biolabs in San Carlos are foreseeable. Why take the risk when only 1% of labs will use them? Please ban them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Appreciate your time. I'd like to shift to the audience here present. I have 3 speaker cards, and maybe if the speakers could be ready to come on up in succession. Let's start with Ben Paul. Good evening, Ben. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Ben Paul, and I am here tonight on behalf of the San Mateo County Chamber. I'm a current board member and past chairman of the board. On the Chamber's behalf, I wanted to bring to everyone's attention the letter that has previously been provided that is against the altogether banning of BSL-3, but rather to permit it under the rigorous CUP process outlined earlier this evening. Prior to sending this letter, the Chamber conducted its own research on this critical issue. We hosted a presentation on biosafety levels that was heavily attended by many local city leaders, including those in San Carlos and some that are here tonight. I am proud of that educational effort by the Chamber. It led to many great questions and answers and included tours of some of the lab facilities that are located just across the freeway from here. In that meeting, we were all educated, and I learned a lot myself, on how regulated the industry is and the massive level of care that goes in to the operation of these state-of-the-art laboratories. Our speaker educators were 2 senior levels from Biocom and another from the Biomedical Manufacturing Network. The Chamber will host other meetings soon, and the speakers will be local biotech company leaders. I strongly encourage you all to attend those. You will hear from these company leaders and how each of them are developing fascinating new drugs and therapies. Different from the standard tech office users that we see so often, these life science facilities are clearly tangibly benefiting and bettering lives throughout the world. And most importantly, these business leaders will describe how and why these innovative labs need to be located here on the peninsula and specifically in San Carlos. They will tell you that the peninsula and San Carlos specifically is where the leading universities are. Here's where the venture capital community invests most heavily. And here's where thousands of scientists work and live to successfully developed life-saving therapies and drugs in the past, and they are starting new companies to do it all over again in the future. As a result of the Chamber's in-depth research and education around this critical issue, it is against the banning of BSL-3 labs in San Carlos and other municipalities seeking to grow their economic development and better the lives throughout the world through life sciences. But we rather suggest that you permit it under the CUP process as outlined earlier this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Next, Gary Boitano. Evening,
Hi,
Gary.
I'm Gary Boitano. Thank you so much for having me. I want to start by congratulating the city and this committee for the growth that the city of San Carlos has seen through life science. What Ben Paul said in the Chamber of San Mateo is in fact true. The city is now harboring amazing scientists. Amazing science is being studied here. Jobs are being brought here. And with a ban on BSL-3, from my world, I'm in commercial real estate, I genuinely do think that it will put a big halt on people wanting to come here. It will be the only city that will have an outright ban. Whether it be 1% using it or not, it will be the only town in the Bay Area that has the ban. And with that will come a potential freeze on this wonderful growth that I just congratulated this committee and the city on. So I really want to be honest in saying, if this ban does go through, I think a big freeze could happen, and I want to make sure the city is aware of that and prepared for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And our third speaker here in the audience, Ryan Guevara. Good evening, Ryan.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the staff for coming up with a great recommendation around the BSL-3 conditional use permit. Last time I appeared in front of you, I spoke about the chilling market effects that a ban on BSL-3 labs would have in the San Carlos market. And while that continues to be true 3 weeks later, I'm not going to focus on that since we talked about that last time. In short, I think banning BSL-3 labs is going to be very bad for this city, and I think we ought to have a conditional use permit process in place as outlined. Upon reflecting on the meeting last time, I felt like it was important to outline some of the various state, local, national agencies that we deal with at MBC. So these include the local fire department, the local building department, county health, Cal Water, Cal OSHA, the EPA, and the Bay Area Air Quality Management, just to name a few. I think Biocom did a nice job earlier in the presentation talking about this. We are a heavily regulated industry at the local, state, and national levels. BSL-3 labs are not restricted as a class of lab anywhere else in the Bay Area. Before you tonight is legislation that would make BSL-3 a conditional use permit or ban it outright. To be clear, by making this a conditional use permit, San Carlos would have the most restrictive zoning laws across any city in the Bay Area when it comes to BSL-3 labs. Let me repeat that. The least restrictive option in front of you tonight would be the most restrictive option across the Bay Area. Between all of the regulation that this industry already faces, the high standards of safety that exist across local, state, and national agencies, and the chilling market impact of any further regulation, I would urge you to simply make BSL-3 labs a conditional use in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Very good. Lynette, we have no more speaker cards here. Excuse me, you like to speak? If you could, grab a speaker form and turn it in. We're going to go back to the internet and the Zoom call, and we'll come back to you, sir. Thank you. Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is Bryce Nichols.
Good evening, Bryce. Thank you for coming, joining us this evening. You have 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So I am a professor of genetics at Rutgers University and a lab director at the Waxman Institute of Microbiology. I'm also a co-founder of the nonprofit organization Biosafety Now, which is a recently formed nonprofit advocating for reducing numbers of high-level biocontainment laboratories and strengthening biosafety, biosecurity, biorisk management for research on dangerous pathogens. So I am an insider. I'm an academic scientist. I have a sense of what has been going on in this sector and what my fellow colleagues as scientists have been telling communities about the great therapeutics and the great vaccines that they will be developing in these facilities. What I don't quite understand is why there is what appears to be a desire for us to keep talking about money, 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 and not talk about the fact that we have just had a pandemic, which the FBI, the Department of Energy, believes came from a research-related incident. You're talking about putting up facilities whose impact will not just affect your local community, but possibly the entire global community. I would say San Carlos has a tremendous opportunity to be a leader in the global community, to stand up to these special interests and people that are just in this for the dollar, and say, no, we do not want these facilities. There are enough of them. We do not need any more of these, because there are not strong laws. There are not strong regulations. That is a complete falsehood. It is gaslighting at the extreme. And so with that, I have 10 seconds. So I appreciate, we were welcomed in here by some of the community activists that you've heard about speak before, and I appreciate your time. Done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Appreciate your comments this evening. Our next caller, Lynette.
Next caller is Gladden D'Souza.
Good evening. I'm sorry I didn't catch your first name, but thank you for joining us this evening.
Good evening, San Carlos Planning and Transportation Commission. I'm Gladwin D'Souza, and I live upwind in Belmont. Thank you for proposing a ban on level 4 labs. Please ban level 3 labs. A ban would prevent the exposure of populated areas to infectious pathogens, such as the world just went through with COVID-19. Many East Coast cities around MIT have banned level 3 and level 4 labs. Earthquakes, power shutdowns, fire, and flooding are real concerns here. In surrounding areas like Salinas, we see escaped biotoxins like E. coli, strep, and science developed antibacterial resistant strains involved in deaths and recalls for lettuce and tomato. Why should we trust that San Carlos would be able to prevent a lab escape, such as the 2015 anthrax release from the Army's Barrett lab? And that was a federal lab with specific constraints. Here you have a private tenant. As the vinyl signage architect said, how do you define permanence? The tenant will be changing, and that makes the fire chief's job impossible. Please note the euphemism here under the name biosafety. There's nothing safe about these labs. Self-regulating problems have plagued prior uses in Silicon Valley, such as semiconductors, which have left behind Superfund sites. The transportation of pathogens creates a dangerous condition through populated areas along 101. Railroad crashes on the East Coast show that transporting chemicals and infectious pathogens through populated areas like East Palestine can endanger public health. The cause of the crashes is the industry and Chamber of Commerce buying politicians through a process of regulatory capture. Why shoulder the risk? Embrace the chilling effect and ban the BSL-3 labs. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments this evening. Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is Jennifer.
Good evening, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us this evening. You have 2 minutes.
Dear Planning Commission, thanks for taking public comment on this item. I am a resident who lives in Greater East San Carlos, so it'd be very close to the developments, all of the developments of biotech. I am speaking in support of banning biosafety level 3 and 4. I agree with everything everyone else said in that same ban solution. I do want to just point out that typically biosafety level 3 is done in a campus-like setting, a university or a big biotech, hub that's removed from residents. In this case, the proposal is to be next door to residents. I've talked to lots of friends of mine who work in biotech and asked them, do you want a BSL-3 lab next door to your home? Absolutely, everybody says absolutely not. So I, again, am speaking on behalf of the residents to say, please think about public safety. In addition, this town seems to really focus on liabilities when making decisions. So I ask the questions, what are the potential liabilities to the city if there is a problem? What are the legal costs to the city if the planning commission moves to revoke a CUP, if you go in that direction, and the bio company does not agree with you and sues you? What are the legal costs? What are the dollars that it will cost? What is the time that it will cost? And all of that. And also, I would also encourage you, don't take the threats from the biotech companies. Those were outright threats. And I think that is shocking that threats were made in a meeting, that the dollars are more important than the residents and the safety. So I encourage you again to ban levels 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is Nina.
Good evening, Nina. Welcome to the commission hearing this evening. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity to speak tonight. Please vote tonight to prohibit high containment labs. High containment BSL-3 and BSL-4 biolabs have no place in our densely populated Silicon Valley neighborhoods. Please prioritize public safety over high-risk profiteering. Listen to the overwhelming voices of your constituents, concerned neighboring communities, Sierra Club members, and the expert scientists who have provided national testimony. All are rightly concerned by the high-risk hazards of these high-containment labs. You've been provided all the information necessary to vote tonight to ensure for the safety of the community in compliance with the San Carlos General Plan goal and protect the community from the harmful effects of hazardous materials and potential pandemic pathogen releases. Please vote tonight for biosafety now. Vote tonight to prohibit high containment BSL-3 and BSL-4 biolabs in San Carlos. Thank you again for your careful consideration and for your valuable service to your community.
Thank you, Nina, for joining us, and thanks for your comments. And Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is David Krabby.
Very good. Good evening, David. Good to have you joining us tonight, and you have 2 minutes, please.
Yes, good evening. I echo almost everything everyone has said against the Bio3 labs. It seems to me that we're talking that the dollars are trumping safety in this issue. You know, because of a few tax dollars, we're taking the risk of having a safety issue with these biosafety 3 labs. And so I find that problematic. The other thing I find problematic is that Planning Commission is considering doing a conditional use permit without having any expertise in how the heck to do it. And they think that we can hire an expert outside consultant to do it that's going to take all the responsibility and tell them exactly what to do. You know, those folks that know what's going on in the biotech industry and would be considered a consultant are connected to the biotech industry. They're going to be, they have to be. And they're not going to go much, not going to be very happy to vote or to make a recommendation against the BSL-3 lab and then anger their constituents, which are the biotech industry. So think about that for a minute. Where are you going to find a really neutral person to do that? The simplest thing for San Carlos is to just ban the BSL-3 and 4. It simplifies everything. There's no liability involved. We know we're all pretty comfortable with the 1 and 2s. A lot of science can be done in 1 and 2 labs. We don't need the BSL-3, so please ban BSL-3. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate your comments this evening. Lynette, our next caller, please.
Next caller is Melanie.
Good evening, Melanie. Welcome to our commission meeting. You have 2 minutes.
She just dropped off. So the next caller is, oh, she's back on now.
Sure. Hello, Melanie, can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think I prematurely lowered my hand. So I am Christy's colleague at Biocom California. I've been in this job for about 9 years, and I am something of a subject matter expert because I handle all of our local government work throughout the state. So I work with many city and county jurisdictions on their regulations related to lab operations. Thank you for having me. I am very concerned about the nature of the comments. It doesn't seem like the people calling in from the community understand the industry. There is no such thing as an unregulated BSL-3 lab unless it's operating illegally. And then that lab would not be able to use any data that was collected in the lab to file for any sort of FDA approval or approval for their treatment or drug. And so that's just not really a realistic stance. I would challenge anyone who's here tonight to think about, people are saying that COVID was released from a lab. All of the current treatments, including the vaccine for COVID, were discovered in BSL 2 and 3 labs. So anyone who is vaccinated, that's where that vaccine came from. We are not special interests. This industry works on treatments and cures for diseases of every shape and size. I'm very passionate about this personally because I have a rare disease and have benefited from the industry researching that rare disease. We're not here to make money, we're here to find cures. Yes, we are businesses, but that doesn't make us the enemy given just that we are businesses. Finally, these are not going to be BSL-3 labs built next door to any homes. They are in industrial zoned places, and there is no BSL-3 lab within the state of California that is in any residential area. So I would just encourage the commissioners to really look at the factual information about how this industry operates. My colleague talked about all of the different regulatory agencies and permits that we are required legally to comply with. And please look at the facts when you're considering these regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Lynette, we have one more speaker card here in the audience. I'm going to switch over to Dino Perazzo and invite him up to the podium, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Dino Perazzo. I come to you from 2 positions tonight. The first is a 20-year resident of San Carlos. The second, I run the life science practice for CBRE and have for 25 years now. In my experience representing and advising hundreds of biotech companies, it certainly has been my experience that my clients, and I think I speak for the broader industry on this, do exceed common practice, exceed the regulations for training, for safety, and for security in their labs. And so I wanted to voice my support of the conditional use permit for BSL-3 labs. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynette, let's go back to the callers on Zoom, please.
Next caller is Dimitri.
Very good. Welcome, Dimitri. Thank you for joining us this evening. You have 2 minutes, please.
Yes, hi. I'm the president of the GESC Neighborhood Association. And I just want to make a few general comments. I was deeply disturbed by the Chamber of Commerce representative and other industry representatives essentially, making veiled threats that if you ban BSL-3, nice town you have here, shame if something happened to it kind of vibe. I think that's unbecoming, and I don't think that's particularly good. I want to applaud Mr. Magginetti's, Nobel Ducci's, and the Sierra Club's efforts to do research and have that seminar. And I feel that the community has done quite a bit of research on this. But I do think that talking about banning BSL-3 versus CUP as it's currently presented is kind of a false thing. I think what I see with the potential for with this conditional use permit is something that isn't fully fleshed out and needs a lot more time to be developed before the Planning Commission or the City Council could accept any kind of conditional use permit. So everything's being treated as a pure binary decision. But I think that if you read Mr. Magginetti's letter, he says at this time we should ban BSL-3 because this conditional use permit process that the city has outlined is nowhere near adequate and does not do the necessary notification for the community as a whole. And lastly, the other thing I want to bring up is San Carlos has a terrible track record when it comes to environmental safety and cleanup. And it's taken community members lots of effort, and we have to correct staff over and over again to make sure the proper studies are done. So the track record that this city has when it comes to toxics is incredibly poor, and I don't think that the expertise is anywhere near in sight for this community and for this city and for its staff to be able to say that they have any kind of process for a CUP3, for a conditional use permit for BSL-3. At this point, it's just not there. And this Planning Commission needs to realize that and needs to put public safety first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Lynette, our next caller, please.
There are no more callers.
I'll wait 10 seconds and see if another hand goes up. And hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to end public comment.
I move to end the public comment period.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Castaneda?
Yes.
Commissioner Roof?
Yes.
Vice Chair Clements?
Yes.
And Chair Iacoponi?
Yes. Well, very good. I suggest, well, first, let me check back. Given the public comment and thinking about our speakers earlier, are there any follow-up questions for staff that any of my colleagues would like to make sure to get on out and clarify to help them with their own thinking on this?
I do have one that's sort of in the follow-up clarification category, which a concern that's been raised fairly often is that private research doesn't come under the oversight of, say, the NIH, which requires compliance as part of their grant process. One of the callers mentioned, well, the FDA requires compliance as a condition for approval. And I wondered if a staff member or maybe our consultant from industry to the city could speak to the FDA rule in making sure the rules were followed as part of their drug approval process.
Good evening, and again, I'm Carla Bragno. I would love for my husband to be here. He's actually a regulatory FDA expert, so I'm not able to answer that question as it relates to the FDA. But what I can say is that what's been presented to you on the staff report is that the conditional use permit actually requires applicants to follow the BMBL, which is from the NIH and CDC, as well as all of the other requirements in the California state regulations. And with the conditional use permit, that's the enforcement mechanism for following those guidelines issued by the state as well as the BMBL. And so I think that I think demonstrates that you actually have nationally accepted standards for how operations should take place. And it's not only just the operations, but it's the design of these labs, the engineering controls, the training, the safety protocols, emergency plans, incident reporting, testing. They're very, very extensive. And then again, the CUP actually allows the enforcement of those things. So anyway, I probably didn't answer your FDA question, but next time I'll bring my husband. So.
Okay, thank you.
That
was still helpful.
Could I have a follow-up, please, since you're there? And this piggybacks on Commissioner Roof's question, which is we've read quite a bit and heard from the public about this distinction between public and private funding. Can you just clarify, is that a thing? Is that a distinction which changes the way regulations and standards are both set forth and be required to be followed?
My understanding is that the guidelines are consistent, whether it's a privately funded or a publicly funded lab. However, with publicly funded labs, those labs actually are required to submit their reports showing that they're compliant with the BMBLs to the NIH and the CDC. So that's the difference. What staff is recommending, or in option 2, is that those reports certified by a third party are submitted to San Carlos. So it's essentially doing the exact same thing as what's required from a public lab.
Thank you. Commissioner Castaneda, did you have a follow-up?
Comes to publicly funded projects versus private ones. Because what you're talking about is the running of the labs themselves, but I'm assuming in public programs, you have peer review of the actual research project itself.
There's peer reviews in private companies as well, and I can't really speak to all the research. There's so much research going on in this space, but there are peer reviews within private companies and their research organizations as well as in the public space. But again, I can't comment to the nature of the research. It's just so broad right now across all of this. Anything else for me?
Not from my...
Okay, thank you.
I'm
sorry, Vice Chair Connors.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's germane to your knowledge, but we've heard from a number of community members that talked about that standards for communicating with the public and transparency to the public is something that our standard set draft does not yet have an adequate form. But I wanted to ask, are there standards out there or concepts that are in kind of best practices regulations about communication with the public or releasing reports to the public or anything about that communication?
So in the BMBL, there are, I think, 2 or 3 requirements where there has to be incident reporting to the local authorities. So in that requirement, or in that document, there are reporting of incidents, safety, et cetera, as well as the requirement to have an emergency response plan. And so, and I think also what you have is with the CUP process, you actually have that transparency as well. So one is around the nature of the work going on, and then within the BMBL, it's also the requirements for incident reporting.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think, I'd like a question to staff, and that is, we have before us banning 3 and 4, banning 4 with CUP, and you've laid out the elements that would be necessary, I think, if this is the right words, as findings to approve a CUP. And I'm presuming that our dialogue could enhance or amend that list if there was something that came out in our discussion this evening. For example, if there was a desire to move forward with the CUP but a hesitancy on a point, we could clarify that point and amend the conditions.
Well, this is a recommendation of the council on a legal change for the city. You could incorporate a specific standard or additional finding you'd like us to make, but conditions are typically attached to a specific project to enable you to make those findings. And I think the idea tonight, I just took a look at the staff report, and you know, the posture this comes to you is staff's recommending its initial proposal, but based on your request, we brought this alternate proposal that would allow what we think is a fairly robust regime to deal with a conditional use permit application we might receive for a BSL-3 lab. If that's insufficient, I think that if you could give us a specific recommendation or addition, because that could become part of the recommendation to the council. If you just, again, if this is only if you're deciding to go with the potential for a conditional use permit option. We'd like to have a recommendation from the commission tonight, because it's already been before you once before, and you know, a recommendation is required for a zoning change before it goes to the city council. So with that kind of in mind, I mean, we're here tonight, and if there's something specific you'd like us to incorporate, that could become part of your recommendation to the council.
Thank you very much for that guidance. I would suggest that you know, each of the commissioners in turn sort of share where their thinking is. Let's say between the two choices we have in front of us, mindful of the guidance that we were just given, and to the extent that there's another point that you want to make, of course, that's your prerogative. So who wants to go first? Commissioner Castaneda.
Well, I'm aware that there's a recent trend in the industry questioning the increase in the numbers of 3 and 4 labs. And I've been told, I haven't confirmed this, but the National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity is concerned about this trend. And I think it's particularly for 4 labs, but 3 labs were mentioned too. And they have actually issued proposed reforms, and these reforms have been sent to the federal government. And I think the major focus of what the board is concerned about is the nature of the research that's going on, more than the safety of the labs themselves. And until that issue is addressed, I'm somewhat reluctant to go ahead with the CUP as it is. I could perhaps have supported it if it was limited to public, you know, government-sponsored, NIH, CDC, Health and Human Services controlled research, because I do believe that kind of research would have adequate peer review to consider the benefits of the actual research itself versus its risks. So I would not be able to support the CUP as it is, because I don't think that it adequately addresses the nature of the research itself, and I do not think that a consultant is going to be sufficient peer review.
Great, thank you for actually for being very explicit. That's helpful, thanks. Maybe Commissioner Roof?
Yes, I think it's critical we get this issue right as a city and make sure that the research activities are compatible with being in San Carlos, and that there's sufficient oversight. And we've heard many excellent ideas about how that oversight might be conducted. The Sierra Club has made big lists that kind of parallel what the city is bringing forward on what sort of things need to be considered when evaluating a potential BSL-3 research. And I want to say that as a city, we're nurturing and welcoming the biotech industry, and I find that exciting because of the potential medical benefits that we could derive as a society from that kind of work. And there's talk about profits, and that's not where I look at it from a positive viewpoint, but rather as the benefit to society. And so when we talk about the risks of something, we have to contrast that with the benefit of having a vaccine in case there is a agent that needs it, et cetera. Early stage research is done in universities, but to get a drug available for patients, industry has to do that. That's how our capitalistic system works. We're stuck with it. It's the way we get new drugs. And there are certainly unmet needs in the infectious disease area. Some of them involve novel agents and research that is fairly esoteric, gain of function, somebody mentioned. That you would really wonder whether it's appropriate to do in this sort of a setting. But I think there is potentially hugely beneficial but far more mundane things. For instance, the common influenza virus that's in our communities. Tuberculosis is not widespread in the United States, but it's a major problem in developing countries. Rabies virus, all of these things would fall under BSL-3. And so to have a blanket ban on everything doesn't make sense to me, but I'm certainly would be wary of many types of BSL-3 agents, but not all. And so that's why I prefer the conditional use permit avenue because it would let us decide one way or the other whether something was appropriate based on what it is. And it's a lot easier discussion to have when you have a specific request instead of being able to imagine the worst possible situation, a specific one, and then the permit would be granted for that specific item in particular. A ban, to me, an outright ban kind of shuts down the debate. There's no need to develop the criteria that the city and the Sierra Club, for instance, have developed. If you're just going to say no, we're never going to consider that. So by closing down, a ban would close down any opportunity for San Carlos to have input in that discussion. While the conditional use permit thing, so long as we aren't tying our hands so that in the future when we're presented with a situation, we're freely able to decide whether that's appropriate or not. I think the conditional use permit is a better place to be. Noting that, until there's a yes answer, subject to public review, it's illegal. So you can't build the BSL-3 lab until you get position. So either route, the starting premise is you can't do that. And then it could only be done in a specific case after public review. Those are my thoughts.
And to you, thank you. I appreciate your comments. Vice Chair.
I thought you were going to go, Chair.
No.
I could go either way on this, frankly. Moving forward with some standards that are based on others, and it sounds like best practices, according to Carla's comments, is a good idea if we want to have that kind of presence in our community. To me, it's not clear the way that this is written as to whether we still retain our rights to say no to a particular use by a particular tenant based on the research itself, the product itself, not the conditions of the labs, not the presence of the safety techniques. And so for me, I actually think that's a question for Greg or Al, which is the way this is written, does that still leave us latitude to say, well, this particular use of the 3 lab seems relatively safe given the presentation, however, a different one may not? Or are we really confined to the opinion on the lab space and safety and standards for the practices, not the product? Sorry, that was a question.
I think I understand the question. The zoning ordinance isn't drafted with that level of specificity as far as types of uses. All I could tell you is, and repeat what I said before, is when we get an application for a BSL3, if we get questions from the community or from the commission, we're going to look at those and analyze whether or not we feel the findings can be made. And if the findings can't be made, are there any conditions that we can apply to the particular facts of that project? And I'll just go back again, what the conditional use permit process means is there's no by right development for a condition for that use. The city still has discretion to deny uses based upon any one of the findings, if you can't make any one of the findings for approval of a project. So I think this discussion, at least if the commission decides to recommend to the council in that direction, we'd be looking at making sure that you had a robust analysis of a specific application that would come before you. That's one of the drawbacks of drafting a law, is we can't analyze every specific situation that might come forward, but we do our best to try and give the city the discretion to say yes or no to a project based upon those facts.
Thank you. And I hear you saying, I mean, there are 2 findings to make, and I think I'm interpreting what you're saying to mean that the 2A, the fact that the applicant had made adequate provisions to address emergency procedures if there was a particularly, I would say dangerous, or, more difficult to contain, or more downsides if it got out, that we would make those concerns and those findings through either adequate or inadequate procedures to address that particular situation. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah, and this is supplemental to the standard findings that you have to make for health and safety, consistency with the general plan, which are designed to allow you to analyze all different aspects of a potential project. They're open-ended on purpose in that way, in that sense, because it allows you to look at the individual situation of any particular application. So I that's just the way they work. And I, these are serious issues. I've heard the comments of the public, and I've heard the comments of the industry representatives in the Chamber of Commerce. So are they all making valid points from their perspective? And that's your job to make the recommendation to the City Council.
Yeah, a lot of valid points made. Thank you for clarifying that, Greg. With that clarification, I am leaning in the direction of putting in place a CUP process that actually adds transparency to the public when there may not be some now. And so I hear also Carla saying that the standards for a privately funded lab, they may have similar procedures or very similar standards. It's just that they did not have to submit those reports to an external body. But we actually could be that external body because they would have to report to us. And so we could enhance the transparency to the public of what was going to be occurring around here, and to allay fears potentially if if folks were able to access those reports. So I'm leaning in that direction. I'll say one other thing, which was just your point, Chair, about I think that into Section C on packet page 104, the operational and performance standards, I don't know if that's the right place to add it, but to make that recommendation that the plan get approved up front, and then there does need to be an inspection to, to confirm that those improvements were made and that those conditions do match the report and the plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Clements, Vice Chair. Maybe, could I check with staff on that point, because it's also been resonating still with me. So if a conditional use permit is granted, there still will be a set of inspection requirements before certificate of occupancy to utilize the facility will be granted? I mean, who owns that last step to say they did what the paperwork says? And how are they qualified to make that point?
Yes, we do agree that could be an added requirement, that there be a peer review post CUP approval to ensure that everything's been adequately implemented.
I would ask for that. I think Vice Chair Clements asked for that.
Yeah, I think an annual certification that the operational rules are being followed.
And I think the difference on this point was that annual happens only after, like, each year, and we're just saying, and before you even, like, light Bunsen burner number 1 or shut vent hood number 1, you get that review.
So both of the, so there's kind of, you're right, there's two things here.
Right?
Two things here,
Yeah.
and a sort of like the final sign-off on a new thing, and then an annual assurance that a compliance, certification of compliance of some sort, so that we have continuous oversight that the rules are being followed. So an annual report card of some kind.
Commissioner Castaneda.
Well, what would be the effect, if you went ahead with the CUP, what would be the effect of any federal standards, which may be, I mean, I think they're being considered now, federal standards, someplace in the government. I know they've been sent to them, so.
I think I mean, this is something that could become part of the recommendation. And typically, in conditions of approval on use permits, we have a condition comply with the standards. And it vary. I mean, for this one, it'd be probably a pretty long list of standards that we would ask them to comply with, I imagine, that to comply with laws related to the administration or conduct of a BSL-3 lab. I don't have off the top of my head all the standards that they would have to apply, and many of them have been mentioned tonight. But if there's any particular standard you want to make sure we apply, or if you want the recommendation, just say all standards, that would be something that would need to be looked at before someone starts operating a lab. I mean, that's something we could try to develop for you tonight, so you can make a recommendation if that's the way you want to go.
I think it would be added to the C, that last category in the operational, that there needs to be the inspection to ensure everything's been implemented prior to operation of the lab. Yeah.
And I heard more frequent than that as well.
One additional point then that we were just getting clarification on, that the then current standards, federal, state, and local standards which govern these facilities are fully implemented.
Sorry, could I just clarify Commissioner Roof's statement, I think, and what we had also noted, that it would not just be an initial inspection like at a C of O equivalent, it would be an annual potentially confirmation by,
Operational,
yes, by the
certification.
consultant to certify that it looked like the plan was still being followed.
So essentially, you're amending C to add a report and an annual inspection. I'm sorry.
That's what I heard Commissioner
I
Roof.
like the word certification. I don't know whether an inspector with
Sure.
eyes is the best way to do it, or some other some way to ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing on an annual basis. And it, may be implicit, but I think if we can have it be really explicit in our rules, it would, help address the probably rightful skepticism people have in the community about industry following the rules. So.
Thank you all. I maybe just a couple of reflections for me. I mean, I think Commissioner Roof's comments about creating the opportunity and the environment for results which benefit the global community resonate with me. I mean, it's a bit of a personal passion as well, but more importantly, I think it's an opportunity that a ban would avoid, and I think that that would be a regret. And while I absolutely appreciate that there is risk, and our citizens have pointed out their concern about risk, I think we've been given the opportunity to set a high bar. I think that the staff's proposal with the requirements that are to have a plan as part, before we even consider, set a high bar, and they give us latitude to say we don't see that high bar is being met. And while we may not, while I may not be an expert on any particular organism, I think that the collective ability to ask the right questions resides with this body, and to get help and expertise from a variety of places if we don't have it. So for my part, I believe with the work that the staff has put forward, we have a mechanism to test whether public safety will be met, and whether in that instance the risk versus the opportunity is a balance, and say no. And it also creates the opportunity to say yes, and that just feels like an appropriate thing to bring forward to City Council. And of course, if in their wisdom they choose to disagree, that's their prerogative. But from a land use perspective, I support the CUP process as written with the additions that we just framed. Yeah, Commissioner Castanedo.
So you don't think that it's necessary to add that we do not want gain of function and enhanced potential pandemic pathogen research?
I have to say, I don't really know what those mean. I don't appreciate the implication, and so I would have to say at this moment in time, no. From my point of view.
I guess I don't see how we can prejudge everything in advance, and so those things do sound like they wouldn't be appropriate to me, but there's a lot of things, and there'll be a gray area, and so to try to do that in advance, instead the beauty of the conditional use process is that would be faced with a specific application, and it may be a lot easier than worrying about what you're talking about.
If I could comment on that point too, I agree that might not be an exhaustive list, and that conditions could change over time. And so to the extent the ordinance is designed for a 10 or 20 year period or something before you have to go back in to it, I think the process is flexible enough that we could ask for the findings and ask for a lot more information about the actual use of the lab, and then decide if we're comfortable. So I don't think it's needed in the ordinance, but I appreciate the feedback on what we might want to look out for.
Thank you, everyone. I know you all have thought a lot about this, and we've received a lot of very thoughtful input from the community and from experts. So maybe before we move to motion, I would just want to then, I mean, I have a sense as to, I think I had recorded 3 votes that would vote for CUP, but with modifications. So we ought to make sure we're clear on what those modifications would be before we say aye to those. So what's the best way to do that, Lisa? I mean, you want to... Do you think you could read back the amendments, the additions that you would make? So that we can say yes?
Working on the wording, and I think Megan can capture it for you. Can you just read it out? We're looking at amending item 3 of the operational performance standards to add your inspection prior to operation and annual. So I think we're working on that wording.
Okay. Do we need like just a 5-minute bio break and let you...
And that way we can have the city attorney take a look at it as well.
That, and then we'll come back. And is that okay? We can do that? Okay. So for everyone listening, I know you're interested in this topic. We're going to take a break until 10:10. Are we close? Lisa? Maybe we can come back to order and reconvene our meeting.
And through the chair, I just want to make sure, Lynette, you're good on your end?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think
Very-
we're all set.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, we are back in session. Thank you, staff, for taking the time to respond to the points made. So I believe we have in front of us and on the screen the revised language regarding inspections and the timing and the timing. And then I'm mindful that there was a discussion, a question around paying for decommissioning. So Commissioner Castaneda, do you want to flag that, please?
Well, I thought that I saw something about decommissioning in here, but I'm not able to locate it right now, and I'm wondering who bears the cost.
It says discontinuance, but it does not.
Discontinuance,
But
or
it does not discuss who pays
is
the
it clear who
costs.
pays for that?
I think the intention here is that all of these reports that we're requiring are paid for by the owner, operator, or tenant.
Oh, not the report, but the decommissioning itself, I thought the commissioner meant.
Well, we're not paying for decommission. I mean, this is about inspections to certify that they're following the law. So they have to pay for that. That wouldn't be something the city would ever be obligated to do.
Can I
It's always
ask,
the property owner.
sorry, Chair, if I could ask,
Please.
was there an edit also about then current standards being periodically reviewed or implemented?
Greg, this was on the point about the then existing federal, state, and local standards and ensuring that they were being complied with.
Well, we
as
do
they
have a
evolve.
reference to guidelines set forth in the BMBL 6th edition or most recent.
Oh, okay. Or most recent.
And then there's the CDC and NIH standards too.
Okay.
That are
Very good. So let me check with fellow commissioners. I think we have modified language for the option 2, which was ban for CUP for 3 as one option. And we have the ban 3 and 4 as the other option. I think we have the language clear. And so I heard myself in favor of CUP. I believe I heard Commissioner Roof supportive, Vice Chair Clements supportive with respect and due respect to Commissioner Castaneda. So can I see if there is a motion to, with regard to the CUP, and with the modified language, and if so, then we could put that to a vote? Sorry, Commissioner Roof?
I'm eager to get to the motion, but I wanted to make one final comment. Well, first, thanks to the staff for on the fly addressing the concern. It's nice to get that captured so well. And second, I think it's useful to acknowledge that we're bringing biosafety lab purview under city land use purview. And we're the first city to do that outside of some airport land use regulations. I think we're the first city to do that in San Mateo, probably San Francisco. So it's a big step forward that to allow land use control of that sort of thing, to allow community input and ensure a good fit for San Carlos. So some people, wanted to ban BSL 3 outright, but let's not lose sight of the progressive nature that San Carlos is taking in addressing BSL labs. So I snuck in my little editorial comment. I don't know if anybody else has any, but I'd be willing to make the motion if we're ready. I move that the Planning and Transportation Commission adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council adopt an ordinance amending San Carlos Municipal Code Section 18 to prohibit activities.
It's not, yeah, that's not the, exactly.
Yeah,
I would suggest San Carlos Municipal Code Section 18 to prohibit activities with biosafety level 4 and provide for a conditional use permit process for biosafety level 3 labs.
Okay, so you don't have it on the screen?
No, we don't have
Okay,
we don't
so
have a
this is
version of
option
that.
1, and then option 2
This is, yeah, we're also, I think the main difference is, as you stated, prohibited, the proposed option 2 ordinance prohibits biosafety level 4 labs and authorizes biosafety 3 labs only with a conditional use permit as specified in the ordinance.
That sounds perfect.
As we modified it this evening, so.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Castaneda,
No.
Commissioner Roof,
Yes.
Vice Chair Clemens,
Yes.
and Chair Iacoponi.
Yes.
And just for the members of the public, the Planning Commission made a recommendation to the City Council, so this matter will also go to the City Council for final review of the recommendation.
Agenda item 9, reports, correspondence, and general information. So report on recent city council actions.
Thank you, Chair Iacoponi. I checked in with staff, and there is no relevant city council actions to report on this evening.
Very good, thank you. Planning and Transportation Commission comments or reports. So Commissioner Castaneda?
I just wanted to report that I attended the library presentation on the downtown plan that took place on Saturday, and I thought that it was an excellent program, and it was very well attended. And I really want to compliment everyone for the exhibits that were put up and the ability for people to make choices. I thought it was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
And I also attended, and I echo those comments fully.
Two comments for me. First is in our household, we went through the objective design review survey and appreciate the opportunity and thought it was well done. So whoever led that, thanks. It was a good piece of work. And I think it was engaging because they were simple examples and you could, it was pretty helpful to be able to call out what you were in favor of or not and why in the moment against the picture. So thanks. And the second is maybe picking up on the comment earlier. Appreciate the staff's work on this topic. This is not easy, and I know each of us wrestled with a whole variety of thoughts here being residents of San Carlos, and how do we want our city to grow, but also how do we want to regulate and protect our citizens and our own families. And so thanks for helping us through the process. Correspondence?
Thank you, Chair. Just for the record, I just wanted to acknowledge, and I'm sure the Planning Commission did receive this, prior to the distribution of tonight's packet regarding agenda item 8B on biosafety levels, we did receive a total of 5 public comments, one from Paul Maginetti, Gail Gose, Gary and Debbie Baldacci, Joe and Kelly Haas, and then Tarizia. And those were all forwarded to the Planning Commission this evening. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. And item D, planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects.
Yes, through the chair, we have a couple of updates for you this evening. First of all, I just also wanted to acknowledge that we had a great turnout. I think all told, there might have been approximately 80 folks that attended the Downtown Coffee and Commons Open House this past Saturday. We are in the process of compiling those comments. All of that will be presented to the Planning and Transportation Commission when we come back to you in late April to report on where we are in the process and generally what the community, how the community is responding to some of the preliminary design concepts that we have put forward. So that is moving forward nicely. I also wanted to mention that we do have an additional survey for folks that did not attend the open house or did not attend the February 15th downtown workshop. There is a survey available on sancarlosdowntownplan.com. or .org, I should mention, .org, that's running until April 1st. So this will be available for a month. It opened on March 1st, and it's running through April 1st. We will be compiling a lot of public comment and be able to share that with the commission. As far as our other specific plan process, we are gearing up for a community workshop, the first community workshop on the Northeast Pacific Plan, which will happen on Wednesday, March 15th. I sent all of you a message about that, and you are welcome and invited to widely distribute that to your friends and to your network. I want to make sure we get a lot of participation in that. On the Commission's next agenda, which is March 20th, we are bringing forward the objective design standards related to single-family building types. This will be a study session. No formal request is asked of the Commission at this time, but we do want to report back on the process for developing objective design standards in single-family neighborhoods. So that is coming forward. And also on March 20th, Lisa Costa-Sanders, please let me know if I'm right. It's still on the agenda. 888 Branston is coming forward. That's a new life sciences. Just want to make sure. Again, another life sciences proposed on the city's east side at 888 Branston. So that is coming before the commission at your next hearing. And that is all I have to report on this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thanks to staff and fellow commissioners for a lot of work and deliberation this evening, and our meeting is adjourned.